Okay, here we go.
Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today is March 23rd, 2026. We are here in the Commissioner's hearing room at the first floor of the Administrative Services Building for Larimer County. And we are here for a land use hearing at 6:30. I am Larimer County Commissioner Jody Shad McNally, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. I ask you to, as I call this meeting to order, to please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you all for joining us. Again, as I stated, I'm Chair Larimer County Commissioner Jody Shad McNally. I'm joined at the dais by my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Kristen Stevens and Commissioner John Gonfalves. We are also joined by our clerk to the board, Diane Cheney. See, Diane, I put you first this time. Not out of sight, out of mind. Sometimes with her behind me, and she does such a great job, we forget she's there. We're also joined by our county attorney, Frank Haug, and we have lots of staff and folks in the room. So I'm going to turn this over to Jenny Oxmaker, our planning director, who's going to tell us some special circumstances for this hearing as well as introductions. And then I'm going to have her turn it back to me. I'm going to just mention something about public comment, and so we'll go back to that idea, but want to just make sure everyone knows that we are here for file number land use hearing for the Aragon Holdings on-light septic appeal for 25-GNRL 0577. Jenny, I'll take this back to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, I'm Jenny Axmaker, the Planning Manager at Larimer County. I'm joined at the dais by Leah Schneider from our Health Department, Senior Planner Michael Whitley, Ryan Oswendell from our planning admin staff. Across the way, we have Community Development Director Rebecca Everett, and we have County Planner Jared C. We also have staff providing translation for this hearing as well. We respectfully request that all members of the public silence their electronic devices. Please help yourself to a copy of the agenda and hearing procedure instructions, which are located on the wall by the door, or if you're joining us online, you can find those on our website at larimer.gov/BOCC/commissioners-meetings. For this evening's hearing, a sign-up sheet will be used for public comment, and time limits will be implemented by the chair. Please wait to speak until you're recognized by the chair. Please maintain civility, refraining from audience applause, comments, or disruptions, whether positive or negative. Anyone who is disruptive during the hearing will be asked to leave. Please make all comments to the Board of County Commissioners from the podium. A portable microphone is available as needed. Please state your name at the beginning of your comments and provide the spelling of your name if it's unique. Please speak directly into the microphone so that remote participants may hear. The microphone on the podium can be repositioned to best capture your testimony. Questions may be asked during your testimony, but will not be answered until public comment is closed and rebuttal has begun. Upon request, we have assisted listening devices for the hearing impaired. For those on Zoom, attendees will be muted until they're recognized by the chair. If an online attendee wishes to speak or request a consent item to be removed, please use the raise hand function on the Zoom control bar or *9 on your phone. If the Board of County Commissioners has a legal question during the hearing, they may elect to go into an executive session with the county attorney. Executive sessions are private meetings where the board can get confidential legal advice. So rather than asking everyone in attendance to exit the hearing room, the board will relocate to a smaller private room. A couple additional updates for tonight. We've had a request for language interpretation, and the interpreters are present for the hearing tonight. If you're presenting, please keep that in mind and please go slowly to help aid with the interpretation process. If you need language interpretation, you can see the gentleman at the table and he will be happy to help you. Also, we've had a request for a group to present information in a specific order. Staff has accounted for that with this evening's sign-up sheet, so that is taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Just because I want to be sensitive to public comment and how much time we spend on public comment. And not everyone, I know you're all in the room, but I'm just getting a feel for how many people in the room are looking to make public comment tonight that have, if you've signed up and maybe not signed up both ways, could you please raise your hand so I can get a feel for how many people? Okay, great. So we will stick with 3 minutes. And because I'm sure some of you, we didn't say whether it be 2 or 3 minutes, but seeing that just by my quick count, I think we can make good use of that time. So we will stick with 3 minutes, staff, and then we will go ahead and start moving forward. And that public comment will coming later. So now I will turn this over to Mr. Whitley. I'm assuming Jenny, who will start the presentation. Mr. Whitley, please proceed.
Yes, good evening. Again, I'm Michael Whitley, Senior Planner with the Larimer County Planning Division. And I will queue up my slide here, our PowerPoint presentation. Oops. Alrighty. As noted, this is the Aragon Holdings on-lot septic appeal. The request is an appeal to Section 435A2 of the Larimer County Land Use Code to allow for the continued use and expansion of a septic system in a growth management area instead of utilizing public sewer as outlined in Section 435A4 of the code. The applicant is Stephanie Fancher English, and the property owner is Aragon Holdings, LLC. Oops. Sorry, technical difficulties. I am trying to get my PowerPoint to advance. There we go. So I will say at the beginning that this is a fairly complicated project, and there is a lot of background to this project. And so given the level of interest in the project and kind of the various elements of it, I will be fairly thorough in my presentation tonight because I think it's important to know kind of the background details, how we got to where we are today, and what at this hearing is being considered and what is at the hearing is not being considered. So with that in mind, I will begin. So the subject property is located at 516 North Highway 287. It is a 9.72 acre parcel in the Fort Collins Growth Management Area, located approximately 1/3 of a mile east of the intersection of North Highway 287 and North Shield Street. The property was rezoned from O open and IH industrial heavy to PD planned development in 2021. The planned development zoning district is intended to be used in growth management areas and is intended to establish densities and uses consistent with the applicable supplementary regulations of the growth management area. In this instance, the allowed uses in the existing PD zoning are a subset of the uses allowed in Larimer County's IH heavy industrial zoning district, including concrete and asphalt batch plants. So the zoning that is in place is already existing. So this property was rezoned, the zoning has been modified. So what we're dealing with is kind of what is allowed within that zoning district that was previously approved. So uses on the property when the parcel was rezoned to planned development included industrial recycling, an auto salvage yard, an office, and a warehouse/storage building. The recycling yard received special review approval in 1978. One of the purposes of the 2021 rezoning to planned development was to change the status of the auto salvage yard, which operated on a portion of the property that had been zoned O open, from non-conforming to conforming. The salvage yard has since ceased operations. In 2023, the planned development zoning was amended to allow fleet services with site plan review approval, to specify that multiple principal uses are allowed on the property, and to allow for an increased height for batch plant silos and bag house dust collection enclosures associated with batch processing. So it changed the zoning with regards to what is possible in the zoning district, but that rezoning did not allow specifically grant land use approval for any given use. Any given use within the zoning district has to go through a special process or a designated process in order to be approved. So right now on this property, there are no designated uses that have been approved through a process since the property was rezoned. So a complete use of possible uses in the current PD zoning district can be found in the findings of resolution included as attachment E, starting on page 137 of the agenda packet. A special review sketch plan application to establish a concrete batch plant on the property was submitted in November of 2021. An application for the public hearing phase for the special review was submitted in January of 2023. There is an active code compliance case on the property because a trucking business, which is classified in the land use code as a fleet services use, was established on the property without site plan review approval. As noted before, the zoning was amended in 2023 to contemplate the use of the property for fleet services, subject to approval through a process. That use was established on the property without completing that process, but the applicant did submit an application, a site plan review application, to legalize the fleet services use on the property in October of 2025. Section 435A2 of the Land Use Code partially reads, on-site wastewater treatment systems must be located outside of urban districts and growth management areas. And as noted, this property is in the Fort Collins growth management area. Section 435A4 of the code specifies that development in urban districts and growth management areas that include the proposed use of on-site wastewater treatment systems shall submit an appeal as a part of the application. And there are 5 items that are required as a part of an appeal, and they're listed on the screen as projected. They're also itemized on page 4 of the packet. So briefly, those items are a technical and economic analysis demonstrating that public wastewater treatment is not feasible, a letter from the applicable city utility indicating concurrence that it's not feasible to connect to public wastewater treatment, a letter from the applicable municipality indicating their concurrence that the development as proposed will achieve the land use pattern envisioned for that part of the growth management area, a letter from the applicable municipality indicating their willingness to annex the property when it becomes eligible for annexation, and finally, information demonstrating that on-site wastewater treatment systems can be safely provided. So the site is currently served by an on-lot wastewater treatment system that was originally approved in 1972. So it is a system that has been on the property for several decades. In 2024, the system serving the office building was redesigned and upgraded to accommodate wastewater from the existing break room and existing restrooms. A permit for that upgrade was issued by the Larimer County Department of Health and Environment. So back to the concrete batch plant. There is a proposed concrete batch plant on this property. That concrete batch plant requires approval through the special review process. So the applicant did submit that application, as I mentioned, and that application, when it was originally submitted, did include the appeal to allow for the on-lot septic system to be utilized by that batch plant. So the assumption through the beginning of this process, the beginning of the special review process, was that because they were part of the same application, that they would be considered concurrently at one hearing. So the hearing would be for the special review, and it would have the element of the appeal to allow for the continued use of the on-lot septic system. So the applicant is still refining their application materials. We're at the very end of another round of review, so I do anticipate that that special review will be coming forward relatively soon, but it is not yet ready for public hearing. However, to gain a decision on the use of the on-lot septic system, the applicant did submit an independent appeal application just seeking a determination on whether or not that the on-lot septic system can continue to be used. And so this this appeal that had previously been bundled with the special review is now separate. And so we are here tonight to talk about the on-lot septic system, which is not, it is independent of the special review. So if this application moves forward beyond the stage that it is now, that special review will go forward to public hearings with the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. Those have not yet been scheduled, but what we're determining tonight is whether or not any use on this property, the batch plant, the fleet services, any future use can utilize that existing on-lot septic system. This item was initially scheduled as a discussion item on the November 17th, 2025 Board of County Commissioners Land Use Hearing agenda. That item was tabled from the agenda at the applicant's request to allow time to refine the application materials. So the revised application materials, including a sanitary system sewer service feasibility study, can be found as attachment C, starting on page 112 of your packet. So in addition to the items listed that we talked about that are specific to an appeal for the use of an on-lot septic system, there are appeal review criteria that all appeals must be considered as a standard. They're the criteria found in the code. Those criteria can be found on pages 5 through 8 of the staff report, and we will go through those one by one. So the first appeal criterion is approval of the appeal will not subvert the purpose of the standard or requirement. So the purpose of the standard requiring public sewer in a growth management area is to ensure that development occurs at urban level densities consistent with the municipality's comprehensive plan, to promote the efficient delivery of sanitary sewage disposal services, and to minimize the use of on-lot septic systems in areas designated for eventual annexation. The Fort Collins Structure Plan identifies this property and other properties along the 287 corridor north of the current city limits as appropriate for suburban mixed-use development, which includes retail, restaurants, and high-density residential uses. Comments from the Fort Collins planning staff state, and these are included in your packet, the City of Fort Collins concurs that the proposed development cannot reasonably achieve the land use pattern envisioned for this portion of the growth management area due to the absence of wastewater infrastructure, service planning, and available system capacity at this time. As the surrounding area annexes into the City of Fort Collins and redevelops, the city anticipates extending all necessary infrastructure for development to support the land use vision outlined in the city plan. So to achieve the land use pattern, to summarize, to achieve the pattern envisioned by the city, sewer is needed, but sewer is currently not available, hence, kind of the subject of this land use application, and hearing. The Fort Collins City staff comments do also note that the city planning staff finds that the proposed use is not consistent with the land use objectives of the City of Fort Collins. They do recommend denial of the appeal request. They also provided a City of Fort Collins City Council resolution stating their formal opposition to the concrete batch plant. And so to reiterate, that resolution was passed, but that was specific to the special review. At the point that the resolution was adopted by the Fort Collins City Council, that special review did include the use of an on-lot septic system that had been bundled with that special review application. And again, that special review application will come before the Board of County Commissioners as a separate public hearing because we're not considering the special review at this point. So the sanitary sewer service feasibility study that was submitted as a part of this application concludes that the connecting the property to a public sewer system is currently physically and financially unfeasible. So they list a number of reasons for that. So according to the study, the cost of extending sewer is estimated to be at least $3.7 million. They note several significant physical barriers, including the fact that the nearest Fort Collins sewer connection is over 4,500 feet away. That connection sits uphill from this site, so there would need to be a lift station used to transport waste from this property to the public system. The extension of sewer would require a cased pipeline under the Larimer Weld County Canal, and it would also have to cross the Highway 287. Finally, the property is currently outside of the wastewater service boundary for both the City of Fort Collins and the Cherry Hill Sanitation District, and neither of the current providers has a system capacity or near-term plans to extend sewer service to this area. Until public sewer service is available, options for development of this property and other properties in the vicinity are limited. Because the urban level uses envisioned by the structure plan are physically and financially infeasible until public sewer is expanded to the area, granting the appeal would allow the owner to utilize the property consistent with the property's current zoning. This would not preclude redevelopment of the property with uses consistent with the structure plan once all necessary infrastructure is available. So ultimately, when and if public sewer is extended to this property, it would potentially become feasible to develop this property consistent with the structure plan. But until that infrastructure is available, it's just not possible at this point. So given this analysis, the Development Services team finds that allowing the continued use of the on-lot septic system would not subvert the purpose of the standard or requirement. Second criterion, approval of the appeal will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or property values in the neighborhood. So the principal public health and safety consideration for this appeal is the adequacy of the septic system. So the Larimer County Department of Health and Environment does support the appeal, noting that the land uses generating limited wastewater can safely be supported by septic systems that are designed to adequately protect surface and groundwater. They also note that the system installed in 2024 is anticipated to generate less wastewater flow than a standard 2-bedroom home. Any future expansion of the septic system, should the septic system be allowed, would require permitting and inspection by the Department of Health and Environment. So the Development Services team does find that the approval of the appeal would not be detrimental to public health, safety, or property values in the area. Next criterion, approval of the appeal is the minimum action necessary. So the sanitary sewer service feasibility study did conclude that connection to the public wastewater system is not financially or physically feasible for the reasons kind of just explained. So because of that, the Development Services team does find that approval of the appeal is the minimum action necessary to allow the use of the property consistent with the current zoning until sewer service is available, and this request complies with this criterion. Next criterion, approval of the appeal will not result in increased costs to the general public. The applicant is fully responsible for the operation and maintenance of the on-lot septic system, and would be responsible for any expansion of the system should it be required. Therefore, approval of this appeal would not create a financial obligation for the general public. So the Development Services team does conclude that this complies with this criterion. Last criterion, approval of the appeal is consistent with the intent and purpose of the code. So to circle back to section 435A4 of the code, that does allow for on-lot septic systems in growth management areas when connection to a public system is not technically or economically feasible, provided specific documentation is submitted. So the applicant has now submitted most of the required documentation to satisfy this code provision, and I'll kind of go through those one by one. They did provide that technical and economic analysis demonstrating infeasibility. They did provide a letter from the City of Fort Collins Utilities concurring that they are unable to provide wastewater service to the property at this time. They provided a letter from the City of Fort Collins concurring that the envisioned land use pattern cannot be achieved due to a lack of infrastructure. And they have support from the County Health Department that the system can be safely provided. So one item that was not part of this application was a concurrence letter that annexation would be considered should the property become eligible for annexation. They did provide a form from the City of Fort Collins noting that the property is not currently eligible for annexation, but they did not have a letter saying we would consider annexation should it become available or eligible for annexation. So the Fort Collins City Council resolution does note that the Fort Collins City Council would consider annexation of this property should it become eligible, but they did have reservations they would have reservations about annexing the property if it were developed with a concrete batch plant. So one thing to note is that that reservation about annexation specifically talks about the land use. It does not mention the use of an on-lot septic system. This particular appeal is again to consider the use of the septic system. It does not approve any particular land use, and it does not grant any kind of land use permissions on the property. So, there are reservations about that. We would note that in this area, every developed property in the vicinity, and I am highlighting here the property, every developed property in the immediate vicinity that has an on-lot septic system has a yellow dot on it, and that is every developed property north of current city limits. So if the threshold is that the city of Fort Collins will not annex a property that is served by an on-lot septic system, none of these properties would ever be annexed. Because the applicant largely satisfied the requirements of Section 435A of the Development Services, largely satisfied the requirements of Section 435A4, the Development Services team does find that the application for this appeal is consistent with the intended purpose of the code. So this application was sent out to a large number of referral agencies, and we also have received a large amount of public comment on this application. The referral agency comments can be found as attachment F in the staff report, but I'll just highlight that the Larimer County Department of Health and Environment staff did provide comments supporting the appeal, and the City of Fort Collins did provide comments opposing the appeal, because they do not find that the potential development that could result from the appeal would be consistent with their structure plan. Many of the referral agencies were neutral with regards to the appeal itself, but may have comments either for or against the actual special review should that special review move forward. In terms of public comment, as I mentioned, this appeal was bundled with the special review application initially, and was actually kind of bundled as a part of it for quite a long time. So we have received a lot of public comment. Most of the public comment does not mention the septic appeal. Some of it does. We did separate out that comment. Attachment H of your packet has neighborhood comments that reference the appeal. Attachment I has all of the neighborhood comments. So with regards to the Development Services team findings, the Development Services team does find that approval of the appeal would not subvert the purpose of the standard of requirement. Approval of the appeal would not be detrimental to public health, safety, or property values in the area. The applicant has demonstrated that approval of the appeal is the minimum action necessary to use the property consistent with the property zoning. Approval of the appeal would not increase cost to the general public, and approval of the appeal would not be consistent with the intent and purpose of the land use code. We also have a recommendation, and that recommendation is for approval. So the Development Services team does recommend that the Board of County Commissioners approve the Aragon Holdings on-lot septic appeal, file 25 GNRL 0577. And I noticed when I was preparing for this hearing that I failed to include a suggested motion in the staff report, but there is a suggested motion in my presentation. You do have a copy of the presentation, so the last page does have a suggested motion with a motion for approval. The board, of course, can kind of modify that motion as they see fit. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Whitley. Colleagues, do you have any questions at this time? Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, can you speak at all to why the two appeals were uncoupled?
They weren't, well, so I will let the applicant speak to kind of the complete reasons, but this septic appeal is key to the ability to use this property really for any use. And so because we have had to go through many rounds of review for the special review, uncoupling the appeal from the special review allowed for the decision on the on-lot septic appeal ahead of approval of the special review. So in theory, it gets a decision, at least, well, actually in reality, it gets a decision on that element of the application before we move forward with the rest of the application. Should the appeal be denied, that we'd have to kind of reevaluate what needs to happen with the special review application. That can be significant with regards to investment in time and money.
Thank you. Thanks for explaining that.
Commissioner Foss, any questions, or are you waiting for? Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. I have two questions at this time. One is it references in the initially that this is an appeal to section 4.3.5A.2, and it talks about the continued use and expansion of the septic system that we are discussing. What does that mean, expansion of the septic system? Since the Department of Health and Environment approved a redesigned septic system in 2024 that, as I read through this material, meets the needs of the fleet services operation.
Yeah, correct. And so there are two different answers to that. The continued use is the continued use of the system as it existed. The expansion does include the 2024 expansion and any future expansions should those expansions or that expansion be necessary. So there is a bit of a disconnect. The Larimer County Department of Health and Environment's regulations allowed for the expansion of the septic system on this property, kind of independent of any kind of land use. But our land use code says that in order to use or expand a septic system in a growth management area for a particular use that is going through a process, there needs to be an appeal to allow for that expansion or even just continued use.
Just one more at this time. Thanks. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
So my understanding of the rezoning from open IH heavy industrial to planned development was because this site is within the growth management area of the city of Fort Collins, and that it was to address the fact that there was a truck operation going on there that was non-conforming, and by putting it as a planned development, it would be conforming. And yet, in the information, it says that the fleet services could operate with a site review approval, and here it is 2 years later, and we're just now seeing the site review application in October of last year. Can you help me understand that?
Yes. So I did process the 2023 revision to the zoning. I did not process the 2020 original plan development. Actually, let me do 2021. So my understanding of the timeline, I do not know exactly when the fleet services use was established on the property, but it was established before fleet services was a contemplated use in that zoning district. And when we went forward to amend the zoning in 2023, it was written in that there's a path forward for legalizing the business through a site plan review process, but approval of that zoning in 2023 to modification to contemplate fleet services with special review approval did not grant approval to the fleet services operation. They still had to go through a zoning process. And my understanding from conversations with the operator and from the property owner is that there was an assumption that because the zoning had been modified, that it did legalize the use, but it came out through review of the special review for the batch plant that site plan review had never been granted. And so this application that we're currently processing, the site plan review for the fleet services is kind of a catch-up to potentially legalize this use, the fleet services use. Now, it's important to note that the appeal is required for any use on this property. And so not only is the concrete batch plant dependent on approval of this appeal, the continued use of this property for fleet services is also dependent on approval of this appeal.
May I just do a quick follow-up?
Certainly, Commissioner Kofolos.
For now. Thanks again, Michael. The second rezoning in 2023, wasn't it a condition of approval that there had to be some kind of site plan review? It was a condition of approval, or am I wrong?
Well, so with a rezoning to PD, the PD sets up the rules for what is possible in that zoning district and what process is required to establish each individual use. It was not specifically conditioned that the existing use needed site plan review approval, but it was built in. Yes, you can use this property for a fleet services use. However, it does require site plan review approval. That's built into the zoning, but there was not a specific condition that said the use on the property is not authorized and this process is required. I did look back at the staff report. I wrote that staff report back in 2023, and it did specifically mention that the use that was on the property was not authorized, and a future site plan review process would be required to actually get that business legal. It was just that there was a gap between when that zoning was approved and when the application was actually submitted.
Isn't it unusual to have a 2-year gap?
It varies. So there are a lot of circumstances, and there are often uses established in unincorporated Larimer County that do not seek zoning approval before they establish. So we do have to do kind of retroactive reviews quite often.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, Commissioner Kafas. Commissioner Stevens, any other? All right, I'm going to hold my questions till after the applicant's presentation, so we're going to move forward on that. So as I understand it, the applicant has someone in person to do the presentation and someone online. Am I correct?
There is someone online, and there are representatives also present. I believe the presentation will begin with online participant Savannah Benedict Welch, who is the consultant.
And they're all aware that it's a total of 10 minutes, so it's 10 minutes total for both of them to work together, correct? Because that's what we've done is 10 minutes.
Yeah, actually, I don't think I explicitly represented to them that they had 10 minutes, but that is standard, yes.
Yes, that is standard, so just want to be very clear that they're combined as 10 minutes. So is the person online ready to go with the start of the presentation, and we have the timer up?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes. If you could identify yourself, once you start speaking, identify yourself, the clock will start. Thank you for being here.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you for having me and allowing me to present. My name is Savannah Benedict Welch with Norris Design. And thank you, Mr. Whitley, for the great presentation. So I am joined physically today with Stephanie Fancher English with Loveland Ready Mix, Ryan McBreen with Norris Design, and John Kohler with Telesto Engineers. So we have a group physically in the room as well. I'll briefly, and we can go to the next slide. Mr. Whitley did a great job presenting the site, so I'll just be very brief with this slide. We know where it's located, north of Fort Collins along 287, just under 10 acres. Current land uses and historic land uses are industrial, office, storage, and warehousing. And we also, as Mr. Whitley mentioned, received zoning approval in 2021 for PD plan development. And then also the amendment that Mr. Whitley mentioned as well, that was started in 2022 and approved in 2023. So as mentioned, the proposal is to, for that we're considering tonight, the proposal is to appeal to allow an on-site wastewater treatment system for this property in the growth management area. And the appeal is for an established business, the Transpro established business on site, as well as the proposed Aragon Holdings concrete batch plant. It's also important to note that we did, as Mr. Whitley mentioned, we did start this process as part of the special review. And Mr. Whitley is absolutely correct that part of the reason why we separated it was to make it clear that this is for both the established business that's undergoing site plan review currently, as well as the proposed. And so it's really allows, for that continued use for both uses. We just briefly wanted to also share the current site plan Really, the intent of this is really just to show the location of the on-site wastewater treatment system, which is located just east of the existing building, the existing office building, and north of the storage. That will continue. That it's certainly in, yep, exactly in that location there. And that will continue with the proposed Aragon batch plant as well. So we can go to the next one. So this shows the proposed use. And of course, as Michael mentioned, we are really considering just the on-site wastewater treatment system tonight, but you can see that that will continue just to the east of the existing buildings. Those buildings that are located on the site will continue to be utilized. They will not be, they're not proposed to be expanded. They will just continue as they are. And no expansions are proposed in that area, just potential employee expansion as we continue the review of the special review that will be considered at a later date. So we'll briefly talk about the justification for the septic appeal. We did go through kind of an extensive review with the county to determine, whether we meet the appeal standards. We did provide that technical analysis that Mr. Whitley mentioned by Robin Design. And it does go into detail as to why connecting to public wastewater is not feasible. Public wastewater is a mile away, so there would need to be a mile-long sanitary sewer line that would need to be built. And it's also has been determined that we're not within an acceptable service boundary. The soonest plan that would be in place for that would be in 2028, but actual serviceability is much further in the future. We were also required to include a letter from the city utility districts. The two that apply in this case are Cherry Hills and the Fort Collins utility districts, stating that public sewer is not feasible and not within a reasonable distance to make connection. So both of those districts indicated that it's not feasible. Also required was a letter from the applicable municipality, as Michael talked about. That's the city of Fort Collins. They did provide a letter stating that they do concur that the proposed development cannot reasonably achieve the land use pattern and vision for this portion of the GMA. So we are, they do concur that due to the absence of wastewater infrastructure, service planning, and available system capacity, it's just certain it's not possible and based on the location of the site. In addition, as mentioned, we did provide a growth management form. They did state that the property is within the GMA, but is not contiguous to city limits and is not eligible for annexation at this time. The map that was shown showing multiple sites around this site, showing that there's multiple sites that are on septic system, and so it shows that really it's just not going to be feasible to connect to public sewer based on the location. And the city does request we do an annexation agreement in the future. Just currently it's not contiguous. And the information also provided does talk about the technical analysis of the septic system. We have demonstrated that the system design meets the requirements for a well-designed on-site wastewater treatment system, and it is sized appropriately for the current and proposed uses. And so, yeah, we do meet the appeal criteria. We, as Michael talked about, we do meet the first criterion, which is we will not subvert the purpose or of the standard of the requirement. So it meets the intent of the standard by ensuring that there's responsible wastewater management where public systems are unavailable. We also meet the next criterion, which is whether or not it's detrimental to the public health and safety or property values of the neighborhood. The first bullet here talks about that there was a comprehensive technical and environmental study shown that support the existing on-site wastewater treatment system is capable of handling the current proposed level of occupancy without creating adverse impacts to the public health, safety, or property values. And there's no indication and no evidence that this will negatively impact neighboring properties. And so the approval of the appeal is the minimum action necessary. We've shown extensive documentation that shows that public sewer infrastructure is not currently available within a feasible distance, and extending sewer for a single development would impose prohibitive costs. The property is not eligible for annexation, and there's no viable wastewater disposal options at this time. Also allowing the continued use of the on-site wastewater treatment system is the minimum necessary action to allow the approved uses, would be the proposed uses in this case, to operate safely and in compliance with health and land use regulations. And then approval of the appeal will not result in increased costs to the general public. No public infrastructure improvements are requested, and so all of the wastewater treatment will be handled on site at the owner's expense using the approved system. And there are no costs to taxpayers, utility providers, or municipalities. And then last but not least, the approval of the appeal is consistent with the intent and purpose of the code. The code aims to balance responsible land use, environmental protection, and infrastructure planning. And this appeal supports that balance. The City of Fort Collins has concurred that the proposed development cannot reasonably achieve the envisioned land use pattern envisioned due to the absence of wastewater infrastructure. The site remains consistent with the land use pattern established in the PD rezone that was approved most recently in 2023, and the use is not expanding beyond historical precedent. And the existing on-site wastewater treatment system has been upgraded, professionally engineered, and approved by county health officials as discussed. And it's proven to operate within required capacity, even with the increased staff. And then allowing the continued use of the system is the minimum action necessary to allow the approved uses to operate safely and in compliance with health and land use regulations. So we have demonstrated that we can meet the review criteria, which is before us this evening. And as Michael mentioned, we will certainly continue to work with county staff and with the public on the special review, which will be considered at a later date. So we do find that we meet the review criteria. Staff recommends approval of the proposed appeal based on the documentation provided, and we respectfully request approval. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Almost perfect timing. We will now move on to see if my fellow commissioners have any questions at this time from the applicant. Commissioner Stevens.
I'm going to pose this first to staff and then maybe the applicant. But so you showed a map of a lot of people who have septic and are using septic for their businesses, all the yellow dots, right?
Yes.
They don't have to come back for approval because they're not changing their use, right? Or they're not trying to expand. Or can you sort of explain? So like there's all these existing businesses that are using septic.
Yes. And so I am aware of several appeals that have been granted, or at least a handful of appeals that have been granted in this vicinity, including the Jack's, which is just a little bit further west of this property. That is a large retail building that is on an on-lot septic system. They did get an appeal to the septic requirement. And then a little bit further down, we have Paddler's Pub, which was subject to a land use hearing just very recently. They also received, or applied for and received an appeal to that septic requirement. A lot of these businesses are well-established and long-term businesses that probably predated the requirement for going through what's called a site plan review process. Site plan review was first required in Larimer County in 2000. And so and actually a lot of this property is actually zoned open, which does not allow businesses. This area has a smattering of businesses mixed in with residential uses. And I would say that most of the businesses that are out here predated the land use code, which contains that requirement for a site plan review. I'm not sure exactly when the requirement for the on-lot septic appeals was first required, but it was probably around that time. We presume, but do not necessarily have evidence for every business that they are legally non-conforming. Kind of that may vary kind of from case to case, but there have been requests and approvals for these appeals in this vicinity.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cavallo, any questions at this time from the applicant? Okay. I will hold my questions as well. So we will move on now to public comment. And Jenny, I think you said about 11 folks had signed up ahead of time.
We are up to 14.
Okay, so let's go forward with those, and most of those I'm assuming are in the room. And so let's go forward with those who have signed up ahead of time. And there was a special group you said that had signed up. Are they the first few? Can just help me understand so I can call up the right group to present?
Yeah, Ryan has the list, and she'll call people up and let people know when they're next on the list. But the first 7 people speaking have requested to present in that specific order. And so we would start with Mike Foote.
So I would make a request before we get started, just to save time, so we're not pausing between those time speakers, that if those folks know their order and are up there, so we're not waiting for you to join, if you all can line up maybe against the wall up there, so there'll just be one after the other, so we can kind of shorten the time with that. I'm assuming the first 7 are the first 7, correct? And so if we could line up so you know the order, just to kind of eliminate any pause and delays, that would be really helpful. And I appreciate, you each have 3 minutes, and if you would come to the podium, identify yourself. The podium's right there, and we'll invite Mr. Foote to come forward and start our public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Good evening. My name is Michael Foote. I'm representing Beat the Batch, which is a community group of Larimer County and Fort Collins residents that are opposed to this property being converted to a batch plant. So I guess I'll start off and say, while we were trying to figure this out, we've been quite confused about the purpose of this particular appeal. Is it for more current employees to use the septic system, or is to convert it over to a batch plant? And you saw in our letter just some of that confusion, but now it appears that really it's for both. From what we heard from the staff and also from the applicant, it's for the batch plant, but also it's not really for the batch plant. It almost has a bit of a dancing on the head of the pin type of aspect to it here. But the bottom line, it seems to us, is that and why it really draws us out, is that it does seem to be trying to get pre-approval for the use of the septic system for a batch plant on the property. They want approval for this outside of the special review process, which is irregular, unusual, and also inappropriate. It piecemeals it out from the special review process. It does not necessarily give it the public and the commissioner and the staff attention that it needs, and that part of the appeal should be denied. There's really no reason for the batch plant to be part of this appeal, other than them trying to get approval for it ahead of time, which is necessary to turn it into a batch plant, without actually going through the special review process. But because it does involve using the process, or using this process to try to get pre-approval of the septic system for the batch plant, the appeal elements should be considered. There's 2 elements of the appeal where this just clearly does not match, or it does not meet those elements, because they want to use it for a batch plant and get this approval for a batch plant. LUC 4.3.5.8.4 subsection C and D are clearly not met. Subsection C requires concurrence that the development as proposed will achieve the land use pattern in the GMA. Not concur that there's no sewer going out there, which is what we've heard before during the presentation, but concurrent that the development as proposed, i.e. the batch plant, will achieve the land use pattern in the GMA. And what you've seen from public comment, as well as particularly from Fort Collins, is the opposite of that concurrence. It is the opposite. And the same goes for subsection D of the 4.3.5A4, the willingness to annex the property. The city of Fort Collins has submitted unambiguous communications that it would not be willing to annex the property if it's used as a batch plant. So this is the opposite of concurrence. This does not meet that element at all. So we ask you to deny this appeal, or otherwise make sure that the batch plant aspect of it goes back to the special review.
Thank you. Thank you for your public comment. The next speaker, please, for this group. Please identify yourself and where you're from.
Yes, hello, I'm Janet Duval. I live in LaPorte, which is most commonly described as an unincorporated village northwest of Fort Collins. As a resident of LaPorte, I did oppose the Loveland Ready Mix LaPorte batch plant, which was approved by the county commissioners, an entirely different group of county commissioners, in a 2-to-1 vote back in 2018. I did oppose it at that time, and I was always concerned because it was passed in spite of significant public outcry. Then, as now, only the county commissioners can protect the property rights and the quality of life for people who live in unincorporated areas. The commissioners' role as champions for the people, in my opinion, is even more important for county residents living within the growth management area under the intergovernmental agreement that was pledged between the county and the city of Fort Collins. I served as Larimer County Commissioner from 1992 to 1996. During those 4 years, the commissioners met often with the Fort Collins City Council and staff, and we worked to strengthen the IGA and to actually put it together in a more cohesive manner. And I vividly remember city and county elected officials sitting around a very long table as we hashed out the details. And I know you all have worked on that as well over the years. The intergovernmental agreement is the legacy of every county commissioner who has worked on it to improve it and to honor it over the years. Today, Aragon wants you to ignore that legacy. As Mr. Foote pointed out, Aragon's application requests approval of a septic system for a trucking operation. And at the same time, it wants you to approve an on-site waste treatment system for a batch plant. Hiding the larger request behind the smaller makes this application a Trojan horse, designed to bypass the IGA and sneak a high-impact batch plant into the residential community near Terry Lake. I urge you to deny this application because allowing a batch plant to operate using a septic system in this location violates the requirements of the IGA. I respectfully request one of two actions. One, deny the application in its entirety because it combines two widely diverse uses of an on-site wastewater treatment system. Or secondly, at the very least, separate the uses. Approve the septic only for the trucking operation, and explicitly strike any mention of a batch plant from the decision. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight.
Thank you,
Next
Ms.
up,
Duvall.
we have Jerry White, followed
Thank you
by
for your testimony. Next.
Tiffin Vaughn.
My name is Jerry White. I live up on Terry Lake, and I was a senior planner in the county planning department for 18 years, many years ago, and I was heavily involved in the development and implementation of the urban growth area and the intergovernmental agreements. Although the applicant and the planning department present this as an appeal regarding use of a septic system, more importantly, it is an appeal for the county commissioners to ignore critical elements of the intergovernmental agreement with Fort Collins. So as the developer has been moving forward with this, they've had a number of appeals, variances, modifications. So I'm going to list those for you. First, there was a modification of the zoning regulations to allow the following in that zoning district. Allow a 60-foot silo and bag house where the maximum height is 40 feet. Add the fleet services as an allowed primary use, when it was not listed. Allow multiple principal uses and multiple principal buildings on the site. All four of these were approved on a consent agenda with no discussion. Second, a requested code modification to the fire protection requirements of the Larimer County Building Code, and a request for code modification to the fire protection requirements of the Poudre Fire Authority. Number 4, appeal to the Planning Department to allow continuation of the fleet operation that has been established and is still there even today. Today, it's more than 3 years that it has been there. Number 5, appeal to allow development of a batch plant in the Fort Collins GMA without public sewer. That is what we're talking about today, and allow development of a fleet operation without public sewer. And then the last one was a request by Loveland Ready Mix to accompany the county commissioners on a field trip to view the LaPorte batch plant. That was approved by staff and contradicts what our members have been told by the county commissioners on many occasions. In addition to those variances that I listed, the staff report also lists the number of other variances or appeals that have to be obtained under the current evaluation. One for paving, for electric vehicle parking, for building perimeter landscaping, for street landscaping, for screening of outdoor storage. All of these would require another public hearing by the Board of County Commissioners. We believe that the applicant must comply with the letter and intent of the Land Use Code and the IGA, and we ask that the Board of County Commissioners not approve the requested appeals.
Thank you, Mr. White, for your public comment. The next speaker of this group, Tiffin Vaughn.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Tiffin Vaughn, and I live in North Fort Collins. The specific question before this board tonight is whether an exception to the public sewer requirement is warranted under the Land Use Code Section 435A4. I ask that this question be considered in its proper context. This septic system is not being expanded to serve an auto salvage yard. It is being expanded to serve industrial operations that did not exist and were explicitly represented as not planned at the time this property was rezoned. Under Land Use Code Section 638C6, representations made by an applicant in submittal materials are binding conditions of approval. The board should weigh that history carefully. The county's own characterization of this appeal as separate but associated with the batch plant acknowledges what cannot be denied. This exception exists to enable industrial expansion. The board is not being asked to approve the batch plant tonight, but it is being asked to remove a compliance barrier that stands between this community and permanent heavy industry. We also call the board's attention to the active code compliance referenced in the staff report for this appeal. Fleet Services have operated on this site for over 3 years without an approved site plan, exposing residents to fugitive dust emissions. The Colorado Environmental Justice Ombuds Office has formally documented that the communities within 1 mile of this site already carry disproportionate cumulative environmental burden. This should not be ignored when evaluating whether this applicant has demonstrated the good faith that warrants an exception. The public sewer requirement exists to protect public health and environmental quality. This community deserves that protection. I ask the board to deny this exception and require full code compliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn, for your public comment. We'll now, Adelia, please.
Madam Chair, I believe this public commenter will be utilizing our interpreter, and so we may want to be a little bit gracious with the 3-minute time.
Okay, I agree, and we'll do that.
Ok. Buenas tardes, comisionados. Mi nombre es Adela González. Vivo en Puri Valley Mobile Home Park. Llegué a esta comunidad en el año 2006.
Test. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Adela Gonzalez, and I live in the Puri Valley Mobile Home Park. I arrived in this community in 2006.
Son 20 años siendo residente en este condado de Larimer, lugar donde nacieron mis 3 hijos.
I have been a resident of Larimer County for 20 years, the very place where my 3 children were born.
Estoy aquí porque me importa mi familia, esta comunidad y la salud pública.
I am here today because I care deeply about my family, this community, and public health.
En nuestro vecindario tenemos vecinos con niños y personas mayores con la salud comprometida, al igual que yo, que sufro de asma.
In our neighborhood, we have residents with young children and elderly individuals whose health is compromised, much like my own as I suffer from asthma.
Nuestro hogar es todo lo que tenemos, es lo que podemos cubrir para poder vivir.
Our home is everything we have. It is the only housing we can afford.
Me preocupa que se vea afectada nuestra vida por una fosa séptica mal ubicada o con mal mantenimiento cerca a viviendas ya establecidas.
I am deeply concerned that our lives could be adversely affected by a septic system, whether poorly sited or poorly maintained, located in close proximity to our established homes.
Eso provocaría grave contaminación del suelo y aguas subterráneas por patógenos o malos olores constantes.
Such a situation would lead to a severe contamination of the soil and groundwater by pathogens as well as constant foul odors.
Riesgos de inundaciones por aguas residuales, reflujo, proliferación y plagas.
It would also create a risk of sewage-related flooding, including backflow, bacterial proliferation, and pest infestations.
Además, puede agrietarse o colapsar el sistema de drenaje, sería un gran impacto negativo a la salud pública.
Furthermore, if the drainage system were to crack or collapse, it would have a massive negative impact on public health.
En el área del norte de Fort Collins ya enfrentamos muchos retos. Considero que ya es demasiado continuar lidiando con mayor preocupación y riesgos.
In the North Fort Collins area, we already face numerous challenges. I feel that it is simply too much to ask us to continue dealing with even greater worries and risks.
Les pido de la manera más amable y respetuosa que por favor mi voz en nombre de toda la comunidad logre ser escuchada.
I ask you in the kindest and most respectful manner possible to please ensure that my voice, speaking on behalf of an entire community, is heard.
Consideren el impacto verdadero que su decisión llegue a afectar más nuestras vidas.
Please consider the true impact your decision could have and how it might further jeopardize our lives.
Thank you so much.
Gracias, Ms. Gonzalez.
I
Thank you.
had the copy in English.
Can you give that to them? And thank you. Gracias. Thank you for your public comment. Mr. Midget, go ahead. Please proceed.
You got it. You're not the first one.
I'm sorry.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Tyler Maget. Appreciate your time. It's a little surreal to be standing on this side of the room. My mom spent over 20 years working for Larimer County as the senior budget analyst. Her role was to help ensure integrity for the county. Her role was to ensure that decisions were made with discipline, transparency, and long-term responsibility. That shaped how I look at decisions like this. Integrity is defined by the congruence between what is said and what is done. So when I speak tonight, it is not in opposition to Loveland Ready Mix or their business. It is for integrity. This is about whether this use is the right fit for the specific piece of land and whether the process stays aligned with the intent of the planned development. The request before you, the approval of a large on-site septic system, is not just a standalone utility decision. It is a step that enables a much larger outcome, the installation of a Loveland Ready Mix concrete batch plant. That end use does not align with the current plan development framework. When incremental approvals begin to stack toward a different outcome, it creates a gap between process and intent. Maintaining integrity means recognizing that trajectory and evaluating it directly. There's also a practical safety component that deserves weight. Based on the applicant's own estimates and some reasonable assumptions around operating hours and delivery cycles, the traffic generated by this operation works out to a truck roughly every 2 to 3 minutes during active periods. Even if that estimate is marginally off, it still represents a sustained high-frequency flow of heavy trucks. These are not passenger vehicles. They carry significant mass, longer stopping distances, and limited maneuverability. When that kind of traffic is introduced at that frequency, the margin of error shrinks. I pick my older son up from the bus stop at the end of our street every day at Meadow and US 287. I can say plainly there are already instances where truck traffic from the current tenant TransPro and other traffic in that area does not consistently respect bus stop signals or surrounding traffic patterns. It is a genuine observation daily. Layering a truck every few minutes on top of that existing condition changes the risk profile. I believe it shifts the conversation to not if something will happen, more to when and how severe. This brings it back to fit, not whether the business is valuable, but whether this location, along with the corridor, interacting with residential and commercial patterns and school transportation, is appropriate for that level of industrial traffic. There's also a personal dimension. Our community has health considerations that make us more sensitive to the environmental impacts, including air quality and particulate exposure. That adds another layer to how we evaluate whether this is the right use for this site. I would ask that you evaluate this request not just as a septic approval, but as part of a broader trajectory that affects zoning integrity. May I finish?
If you can make a closing statement, please. Thank you.
I'll end where I began, with integrity. The strength of the system is not just in the decisions themselves, but in the consistency between what is planned, what is approved, and what is ultimately built. That consistency is what will continue to build trust over time in our community. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your public comment.
Danny Hessler, followed by Claire Havelada.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to present. My name is Danny Hesser, Hesser. I live right across from Aragon Holdings. The first thing I noticed about the Aragon plant after moving in August of 2024 is the noise which often starts at 3 or 4 in the morning. My partner and I reside near the entrance of Meadow Lane, and the noise seems to funnel right towards us, as well as the light pollution. I worked for 15 years in a laboratory at CSU. Part of my responsibility was to handle toxic waste. I learned a lot about the regulation side. If a mere teaspoon of chloroform or methanol were to go down the drain, it would be fined thousands of dollars to CSU, to our lab. I find the kind of pollution generated at concrete batch plants in my own personal research to be more insidious. Particulate pollution penetrates deep into lungs and can trigger serious health conditions, including reduced lung development in children, asthma, bronchitis, heart disease, and cancer. There's increasing evidence that particulate pollution can make us more susceptible to COVID-19, and I'm also concerned that dust from this operation can trigger episodes in those with long COVID, such as my partner. An analysis conducted by the Harvard School of Public Health revealed that widespread particulate pollution in Houston, which has one of the highest densities of batch plants in the nation, contributed to more than 5,000 premature deaths in the year of 2015. 75% of those deaths were in areas where levels of particulates were below the EPA's current federal standards, which I believe is 15 micrograms per square meter. Expanding the batch plant to our area fits a profile of what we call environmental racism, where industrial processes are often located near immigrant populations and where minorities have less agency to fight these incursions and less ability to deal with adverse health effects. The current level of operation at Aragon is already causing great concern. The calcium silicate plume that was released just this past January when the filter bag broke is cause for alarm. Respirators and eye protection are required during these transfers, which will protect workers, but what about those of us exposed to such plumes? The proposed expansion of the plant will no doubt lead to many more instances such as these, exacerbating air quality conditions. Also, skirting the requirements for appropriate waste disposal speaks to a pattern of Aragon Holdings' lack of due diligence for community safety with regards to property values, but especially health and safety of all surrounding neighborhoods. The proposed batch plant will be very deleterious. This industrial process needs to be isolated away from neighborhoods. I urge you to require complete code compliance. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I'll invite Claire up to the podium, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Claire Havelda. I am with the law firm of Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, and Schreck, which is located in Denver, but I will say I have been a resident of Fort Collins for over 15 years. I represent a nearby landowner directly impacted by Aragon's application. I have written letters on my client's behalf that have been made part of the record, and I ask that you consider them. In my limited time, I wanted to emphasize the following points. Your decision this evening rests on whether the applicant has met the criteria of your land use code, section 4.3.5.A4, A through E. The applicant utterly fails to meet subsections 4B through D. And while the applicant seeks to be accepted from these rules, your code provides no mechanism to do that. Turning to subsections B through D. They require the following from Fort Collins. 1, that it is not feasible to connect to the public wastewater. 2, that the development will achieve the land use patterns envisioned by the GMA. And 3, the city is willing to annex the property. The applicant submits the letter from 12/11/25 from Matt Simpson, apparently to satisfy criterion B. But if you look closely at the letter, it does not say that the connection is not feasible, only that there needs to be significant infrastructure upgrades, ditch crossings negotiated, and that the city is in the process of funding a master plan to evaluate the area. That the city doesn't have immediate plans to upgrade the system is not the same as infeasibility. Indeed, the city's planning manager's letter from 12/23/25 supports this. Mr. Fricke states, and I quote, "As the surrounding area annexes into the city of Fort Collins and redevelops, the city anticipates extending all necessary infrastructure for development to support the land use vision outlined in the city's plans. Not providing municipal wastewater services on the applicant's preferred timeframe or at the city's cost is not the same as not feasible." The applicant's argument also completely ignores the maxim that development pay its own way and be in conformance with local jurisdictions' land use plans. Regarding criterions C and D, City Resolution 2495 makes clear that the city's stance on the application. It does not achieve the land use patterns of the city's GMA, and the city has grave concerns regarding annexation of the proposed non-conforming use. There are no exceptions in your land use code for failing to comply with 435A4 B through D. Denial is therefore required under the plain text of your code. Seeing that my time is almost up, I would simply ask that you review my letter from 11/14/25, pages 2 and 3, that explains how the approval of the project directly contradicts the core objectives of the IGA that was mentioned earlier. With that, we ask for denial of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Havelda, for your public comment.
Next up is Mike Orzel, followed by Peter Mang.
Welcome.
Thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak. Unlike the previous speakers, I did not come with prepared statements, and I wasn't really even planning on talking tonight. But prior to coming to the meeting, I got onto the Larimer County website, and I looked at all the documents related to the concrete batch proposal that are out there. This proposal dates back 5 years. There's documents dating all the way back to 2021, and there's 5 different iterations of proposals that this potential developer has presented. And in my opinion, this appeal for a variance on the septic system is just another example of the developer trying to overcome some very serious environmental and other obstacles for this particular location, and just an opportunity to try to shoehorn this proposal in that, in my humble opinion, the shoe doesn't fit this site. So I ask, considering all of that, I ask for you to deny this proposal for the septic plan. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Next speaker, Peter.
Peter, followed by Andrew Moten.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Peter Mang. I live about 3/4 of a mile downwind from this proposed site. I'm here because this decision directly impacts my property value and my retirement. Before anything else, I want to point out something fundamental. This is not a small administrative decision. This is an infrastructure approval tied to a much larger industrial use. You're being asked to approve septic for a batch tank plant that has not been approved. The special review is still pending. If you approve this tonight, you are locking in industrial infrastructure before deciding whether that use is appropriate at all. That's backwards. The application also suggests Fort Collins supports this. That is not accurate. The city has formally opposed the project and clearly states it does not meet the intended land use pattern, and their concurrence is not approval or support. That's a direct conflict with the long-term plan for this area. For me, this plant, not the septic system, is a 10 to 15% loss in property value. That's $60,000 to $80,000 out of my retirement. And it's not just me. If you apply even a modest impact across roughly 1,000 nearby homes, you're looking at tens of millions of dollars in lost property value. That shows up immediately in how this area is perceived and valued. The applicant's own modeling shows residential properties exceeding county noise thresholds, even with mitigation. That's not theoretical. That's a direct hit to livability and marketability. The septic system was designed for office use about 18 people. Now it's being asked to support significantly more people with some small additions. Even the county has already raised concerns about whether that type of wastewater can be properly handled. That risk doesn't stay on site. It moves outward. This application does not meet the standard required for approval. It conflicts with the city planning. It introduces unresolved impacts, and it's being decided on an incomplete record. I respectfully ask you deny this appeal. Thank you. I've also submitted a handout for your reviews that emphasizes some of these points. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your public comment. Our next speaker.
Grace Moreno will follow.
Hello, I'm Andre Mouton, and who's going to vote on this? Do you three guys?
We're not answering questions,
Oh, okay.
so you're just doing
I'm
public
assuming
comment,
that you
please.
three guys. But anyway, I just wanted to point out that what's happening here is a separation of these two items, the septic and the future problem, which is inappropriate. I think it's a trick. And also I want to point out that this is not something that can't be done. I thought a price was put on it, $3.7 million. So they can do it for $3.7 million. They're asking you to cut them a break for $3.7 million. This is a company that makes over $15 billion a year, ready mix, and they profit $200 million a year. This is a major corporation. And I'm all for successful business. I'm one myself, and I have nothing against that. But there just doesn't seem to be any point in approving this thing. It's just giving them $3.7 million. It's not impossible to connect that line in. It's totally possible. And someone did a study and said it was $3.7 million. They're asking you to give them that. That's all it boils down to. Plus, like everyone else brought up, it's just the first step in approving something that is clearly a tremendous mistake. I mean, it's just so bad for the neighborhood. It's right on a lake. So if you think a septic system, once they start putting chemicals in it, as this other guy pointed out, what's the chance that some of those chemicals are going to leak into the lake, etc.? It's a disaster. The whole thing's ridiculous. So we hope that you'll do the right thing and say, hey, we're not going to make it easy for you to do the wrong thing here, just so you can save $3.7 million. That's 100% what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. The next person, Grace.
Will be followed by Doreen Martinez.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Commissioners. My name is Grace Moreno. I'm a resident of Fort Collins. I've lived here for 2.5 years. Notwithstanding assumptions, approvals, conditions of approval, etc., that we've discussed here earlier, according to the following quote from beatthebatch.org that's been attributed to Aragon Holdings regarding this project. They had submitted something in writing saying no new development is proposed with this rezone, and the existing salvage yard use will continue. Beat the Batch fact sheet goes on to state the following in reference to that quote. However, less than 5 months later, Aragon started their quest to develop the property when they submitted a detailed sketch plan for construction of the batch plant. My concern would be if we've had changes, although applicant said there were no changes or there would be no changes. First, the salvage yard to a fleet yard, now a fleet yard to a batch plant, which may or may not include addressing nonconformities, etc. What's to say that this time is really, no, I mean really, we're not going to make any changes? Thank you for your consideration for our comments. I respectfully request that you deny this appeal.
Thank you for your public comment. We'll invite Ms. Martinez up to the podium, please.
And following her, Clay Fricky.
Good evening. Thank you all, and I appreciate your time. I want to point out just a couple things and highlight maybe some things.
And I'll
that
just
are
have you,
said.
I'm sorry to interrupt, can you just identify
Thanks,
yourself?
Doreen Martinez.
Thank you.
I don't know, somebody asked, spell my name, Martinez. I just want to point out a couple things that I think that overall we're talking about a land use code, and at times I feel like people want to say that's a one-dimensional idea, that it's a code and it's written on paper, yet land is alive. People are living in it, species are living in it, and I think that at times we forget that three-dimensional aspect of what a land use code is actually seeking for us to pay attention and protect. Most often that's an issue of land use code. If it's a protection of businesses, a protection of people, a protection of the environment. And I thought it was striking that on a couple of the initial presentations, there was a map that was shown in terms of the site context. That's what actually was stated. Yet continuously that site context only named that actual development in terms of the business, never mentioned this big blue spot that was on that site context, which is this huge lake, never mentioned all the residential areas that were next to it. So I think that site context in terms of what it was initially offered is already incomplete in terms of what it's asking us to consider in this situation. As far as the code, there's a number of people have already indicated all the ways in which there's a failure to meet that appeal of that code. And I wanted to clarify too, within that, one of the other maps that we were shown gave you a lot of yellow dots with current septic sites, and was in some ways I felt like the inference was just add another yellow dot. And I think that that actually is misleading, again, in terms of looking at something much more three-dimensionally. It's what's the impact of those dots, right? And not just that it's another dot. And again, people have raised those concerns around those yellow dots. And although there was a clarification, and I really appreciate the commissioner's questions, one of the clarifications was some of the past appeals. And yes, some of those were granted. Yet, I want to point out that one of the things that the commissioners have taken on is the Larimer County Climate Smart Future Ready Plan, which says, what are we looking at in the future? So although you might have had exceptions before on some of these appeals, I think they can get into a very dangerous situation that we're just looking at the past to actually think about our futures, which you've already committed to doing. And I think it's our futures through literally this one example of the septic system that is at a much higher risk. And in some conjunction with not in some, but in an overall conjunction, I would honestly and appreciate your denial of this appeal because of those futures that are being impacted by this consideration that has a number of concerns. The cost people have mentioned numerically, we have to remember the cost to health. We have to remember the cost. So that appeal that says there's no cost, it's only a financial one, and there's much more cost to it. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. Next speaker.
Good evening, Clay Fricky, Planning Manager with the City of Fort Collins.
This is my first time on this side of the aisle providing comments at a public hearing, so this is a little unusual. Appreciate your time. Also wanted to say thank you to the county staff for their our collaborative relationship. We have a really strong relationship with your county staff, and they do a wonderful job. So just want to say thanks to them. I'm here to reiterate our position as a city of Fort Collins. You all have the resolution that City Council passed 2 years ago with respect to the batch plant. Our concerns remain. I will also reiterate the position of the planning department as well, in that industrial activity such as this would not conform with city plan or comprehensive plan. As planning staff mentioned during their presentation, the vision for that part of the community is kind of an extension of the North College corridor. So if you can imagine the King Soopers Marketplace and even the Jacks subdivision and commercial strip right next door to this proposal. That's sort of the idea of continuing that commercial spine up North College. And so this sort of heavy industrial activity is not something that we would permit in the city of Fort Collins if it were in the city of Fort Collins. And that is the purpose of us providing referral comments to the county, is ultimately the city of Fort Collins will inherit this land use pattern upon annexation. And so that is why we've provided comments to county planning staff and why I'm here this evening to reiterate our position. And so I won't spend more time going over the contents of the letters and things because others have done a really good job of articulating that. So I just wanted to reiterate our position and also to when and if the batch plant comes back up for your consideration, we'll be here to share that message once again. But I appreciate your time and thank you for the opportunity to comment. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Freaky, for your public comment. Okay, we've gone through our list of signups, so I'm going to go to online and ask Ryan. We'll come back to the room to see if there's anyone else, but I will go, Ryan, to now whoever's online to see if there's any public comment from folks joining us virtually.
Madam Chair, there are no members of the public online.
Great, thank you. Okay, we'll go back to the room for any of you who have been sitting so patiently. If there's someone who would like to add to public comment. Okay, we'll go ahead and you'll come up. Oh, well, you already did public comment, sir. I'm sorry, you can't do it again. Nope, you can't. I'm sorry, you always did that. I apologize. Also, I'm like, wait a minute, that looks familiar. Try to sequence past me. It's not going to happen, even though it's 8 o'clock. Let's try. And I'm just trying to make a little humor because this is our second land use hearing. So I'll invite you, ma'am, to come up and please state your name and where you're from. And you'll have 3 minutes for your public comment.
Hi, my name is Glenna Brissy, and we've been in Fort Collins for 23 years.
Would you mind spelling your last name for the clerk's help?
Brissey. I think we're on another slippery slope. If you approve this septic system, then that's going to make them think they're going to put in the batch plant. Is that what we really want to do? I don't think so, as you've heard from many here already. With that map, I noticed that most of those septic systems lied south of 287 and do not service at least 160 people on a daily basis. My husband and I, oppose this proposed development. The tract adjacent to the site already has high environmental burden scores, as you're well aware of. And it indicates significant pre-existing pollution impacts, which you're already aware of. The development plan proposes an average of 158 truck trips daily, which would exacerbate traffic congestion, noise pollution, diesel emissions along Highway 287, which is College, and we're already starting to see additional trucks coming up North Shields and Douglas Road, which is residential area. Terry Lake, of course, is right there. And with 160 people using a septic right at the base of Terry Lake, and isn't a good idea because sewage goes out. And we're also saying, of course, the Aragon concrete batch plant does not fit our area, as noted by the city, and we oppose it. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. Okay, last call, shorter last call. Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Thank you all. We do appreciate the public's engagement in getting public comment. So now, after we close public comment, we give the applicant 5 minutes for rebuttal. So we'll invite the applicant, whoever would like to come up to the podium, you have 5 minutes for rebuttal. Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, hello, my name is Stephanie Fancher English. Thank you for hearing us tonight. Since I have 5 minutes, I'm going to go Jimmy John fast, so hang on with me. Why were we uncoupled? It made sense for us to separate this issue and actually give you guys a break. And you get to, it was going to be heard no matter what, but let's focus on the septic appeal, and then let's focus on the land use appeal. It just made sense to us. There was no hiding. In fact, it was staff that said, look, you're going to have to appeal the TransPro use. You might as well, let's talk about the elephant in the room and let's appeal both of them. So I felt like that was actually a very transparent thing to do. I didn't feel like we were hiding anything. Expansion, we've already sized it appropriately for the use on site. I think that's part of your application. Why are we 2 years late? That's a good question. I'm not going to make excuses. When TransPro moved on site as part of their lease agreement, they were in charge of getting site plan review. We both thought it was a different use. We did not know it was a fleet services use. I was under the understanding they had their site plan approval. They even had a building permit to install a diesel tank. And I didn't think they would have a permit to install a diesel tank unless they had their site plan review approved. But we shortly found out that they did not. And then we shortly found out that the use we thought they could use, which was outdoor storage, was not appropriate. So we went back and adjusted our PD zoning to add the fleet services use. In that period of time, they changed ownership. First owner went bankrupt, second owner came in, and I had to try to get the troops rallied to get the current application in. So no excuses, but there's a reason why we're 2 years late. We don't feel that this process subverts the land use hearing process. If there is a land use hearing, it will be just like it needs to be. Time frame, what time frame is acceptable for City of Fort Collins? Are we supposed to wait 20 years for sewer to come down to us? They don't even have it as part of their master plan. So, and if you look at the map in your engineering report, you will see that they have quite a few other infrastructure that's already within their city limits that has to be taken care of. It's in poor shape. So we're not confident that there's going to be sewer down there anytime soon. This property has been zone industrial for over 40 years. So we feel that what we're asking for is an appeal on a septic system for an industrial use on a property that's been that way for 40 years. One gentleman said we made $200 million a year. I wish we did. That would be really nice if we did, but we don't. And $3.7 million to get it connected. But again, if you look into that report, it will show that we would be connecting into infrastructure that is also can't handle what can be added. That being said, any use on this site, because of the PD zoning, we'll be coming back to you for a septic appeal. So it's not just us, it's any use on this site. And that's the way the land use code works. I think a lot of people aren't familiar with it. We work with it every day. But anytime that we get a new tenant or a new use on that property, it's going to have to go through some type of approval, and then it's going to have to come back to you for a septic appeal. So just wanted to point that out as well. Any other questions?
It's your time for the for the rebuttal, and then
Okay,
we'll
all
ask
right.
questions. So
Okay.
if you're just want to make sure you have about a minute left.
I think I'm going to look at my notes real quick. Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your rebuttal. Go ahead and have a seat. I'll see if there's any questions. You might have to, I might make you get your steps in by coming right back up to the podium, but we'll see. Colleagues, so rebuttal is over, and now it's time if you have further questions. I'll start with you this time, Commissioner Cafalas. Do you have any questions for the applicant or for staff at this time?
I do not.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, I have some questions. First of all, one of the speakers said that there still wouldn't be a special review. There would still be a special review if the batch plant came forward to us. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so this is not subverting that process. That would, I mean, if were this to be approved, that would still come before us.
Yes, there would be public hearings with the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners, and the consideration would be compliance or non-compliance with the applicable review criteria and development standards absent on-lot septic if this on-lot septic appeal is approved. So there would still be consideration of compatibility, traffic, access, all that sort of stuff.
Okay, thank you. Also wanted to clarify, I think we had said earlier that septic was approved for Paddler's Pub, and I don't think that's exactly true. We actually approved them to be able to use porta potties for events.
Actually, I'll let Leah Schneider with the Department of Health and Environment clarify that.
I mean, I think that we said that their septic was not to be used for the public.
And yeah, there's a number of reviews that we've done on that property, and at one point they were proposing sewer, and City of Fort Collins had supported that, but then the project to extend sewer didn't move forward. So they had to come in and actually appeal sewer to allow some type of supplemental wastewater service, whether it was using a septic system. If they expanded on a big project, they were going to put 2 large septic systems on. Or if they kept it as is, we could look at smaller wastewater services like, vaulted restrooms with water, or porta potties if it's just associated with a special event permit through the county. So there's a number of options that have happened on that property, but they have recently, I believe we have now, through one of their special reviews, but that's expired, they did receive support for an appeal to be on septic systems on their last one.
Oh, I thought the last
That was
one
independent, though, I think, of the special review one we just looked at.
Okay, because I thought they weren't allowed to use the septic, so maybe I'm confusing that way. All right, I just wanted to clarify that. Second, there's several people that spoke to the IGA, and so, but I mean, we're supposed to follow the land use code, and I mean, do we need to discuss, I mean, is the IGA pertinent? Is it relevant in this case? Because it was discussed several times of this goes against the IGA, this goes against the spirit of the IGA. So can someone speak to that, please?
I think Frank might have an answer, but my answer would be that, kind of the standards and, kind of consideration of the IGA have been built into the land use code with regards to the requirement that any land use in the growth management area be served by public sewer unless an appeal is granted. And so the IGA also speaks to what type of applications are referred to the city of Fort Collins, what type of what type of land use applications trigger annexation if properties are eligible for annexation. So the IGA actually lays out the working relationship between the county and the city, and that is memorialized in the provisions of the land use code. So it is an important working document. And I do believe that, kind of this process kind of lays out deviations, kind of when and if deviations are to be approved, under what circumstances. And so the IGA kind of did set that framework up.
Just to add on to that, I think there's sort of two pieces. The criteria in this one, I don't see directly relate to the IGA, and so the IGA is not a consideration in terms of the criteria for this application. And Michael can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the answer is that a site plan review would not trigger the IGA, but a special review would trigger the IGA.
Well, so to clarify that, the IGA spells out for what type of applications would trigger consideration of annexation to the city of Fort Collins. Mr. Haug is correct. A site plan review application would not trigger annexation or consideration of annexation to the city of Fort Collins. A special review would if the property were contiguous to Fort Collins city limits. In this case, the property is not contiguous to Fort Collins city limits. The Fort Collins city limits are approximately that same 4,300, 4,500 feet from this property. So it is almost a mile away from current Fort Collins city limits. The whole point of the growth management area is to identify very long-term, without a time frame attached to it, what properties will likely be incorporated into the city of Fort Collins for planning purposes, and where we would like to do cooperative planning with regards to long-term plans for the city of Fort Collins. We are reviewing applications and referring applications to the city of Fort Collins with the long-term perspective that we would like, kind of the development that occurs in the growth management area to be consistent with the Fort Collins structure plan. However, like I said before, there are kind of exceptions that can be requested with this, kind of provision of sewer. There are certain circumstances under which the Board of County Commissioners can consider that. So it is a judgment call. We have the criteria, we have our analysis. The duty of the Board of County Commissioners is to use their own judgment and whether or not the proposal meets the applicable review criteria. And we do understand that, there is room for differences of opinion, and even within Board of County Commissioners decisions, it's often a split decision. So it's not a black and white answer always. There is discretion with regards to whether or not any given proposal meets the review criteria.
Thank you. Just a couple more, Madam Chair.
Certainly.
Okay. There was a lot of people concerned about groundwater contamination, contamination of the lake, seepage, overflow. And so probably Leah's question. Leah, can you talk to this kind of safety of a septic system and kind of some of the concerns that you heard, that you probably also heard from several people around septic systems?
Sure. And I will say so septic systems eventually have a lifespan. They will fail, and that's what happened with the 1978 system. It was in poor condition. So when Aragon Metals when Loveland Ready Mix took over, they had done the inspection to check the septic system's abilities and found that it was failing. So that was a trigger for us at the health department to require a new septic system. This is for every residential and commercial or business type property now has to go through what we call a transfer of title, and you have to have a third party inspector come in, inspect it, and then we evaluate whether it needs to be repaired at that time or if it can move on, and if it's safely operating, if it can continue as is. So in that case, a new septic was installed, and this new septic is, as you saw all the little yellow dots in this area, this is probably one of the newest septic systems in the area, and it is a sand filter system that is pressure dosed. So it has a pump that equally distributes the wastewater after solids have settled. I mean, we could go way deep into a septic system design here if you want, but so settles solids separate out in the septic tank, and then we have a pump system that equally distributes a specific amount of water all the way across the field, so it equally saturates the sand. All we need is about 4 feet to adequately treat, to remove things like pathogens, contaminating organisms, things like that. And then that is considered, you wouldn't want to drink the water, but it is adequate treatment for something like groundwater and surrounding surfaces and soils. This water is expected, like once it's gone through its send filter, the water stays in place. It is not seeping further over to Terry Lake. It is not seeping across 287 to any of our homes. It is not seeping into Dry Creek. The system is adequately designed to protect surface water, groundwater, lakes, well water in the area.
Thank you. I think, that's important to know for both this hearing because I heard it a lot, and also because if people looked at the map, there's a lot of that, and if they were fearful of that happening, we have health measures in place for that. So I just wanted to clear that up. And then my final question, and then I'll let someone else have a chance, is, someone spoke to a lot of the variances that have been allowed on this site. So and I in particular don't really remember, and it could be before my tenure, that some of those variances happened. And can you just briefly kind of talk about, so there was like an allowance of a taller structure, can you just kind of like quickly recap what those variances that have been given in this space?
Yeah, thus far, the only deviation from a standard that has been approved is that allowance that would allow a silo or a bag house to exceed the standard 40-foot building height to be up to 60 feet on a case-by-case basis. And that was built into the rezoning in 2023. So there was reference to a number of variances that would be required for the Transpo property. So the special review that is under application is considering this concrete batch plant. The only appeal that was built into the concrete batch plant special review was this on-lot septic system. There are no other deviations that are contemplated at this time. Now, if the special review were to be granted, they would have to do a follow-on site plan review. And at the site plan review, we would look at a finer level of detail with regards to specific site development. So the special review looks at, is this use or is this use not appropriate for this property? And then if the Board of County Commissioners approves the special review and says, yes, this use is appropriate, we would dig in a little bit deeper and look at, into more detail, parking, access, landscaping, drainage, that sort of thing. We are looking at those things as a part of the special review, but we get into a greater level of detail with the follow-on site plan. That said, there could be additional appeals that would be requested at the site plan review phase for the Aragon Holdings concrete batch plant special review. With the site plan for the fleet services, that is a use that is allowed subject to approval through the site plan review process, during which we evaluate the proposal for compliance with all our development standards. That has only gone through one round of review, and we are actually still waiting on some comments from referral agencies on that first round of review. But we did identify several standards that either need to be complied with or appeals need to be requested. That does include pavement, parking, landscaping. Those are the big ones. So that has not been settled yet, and no appeals have been granted for either the site plan or the special review. The one deviation, as I said, was that approval that allows for the flexibility to go up to 60 feet if a concrete batch plant is approved through the special review process.
Thank you. That's helpful. That's all for me. Thanks.
Okay. I have a few questions. And I may be repeating some of Commissioner Stevens, but I'm going to ask them differently. So firstly, I'll put you on the spot. Pull up the picture of the vicinity map. Because I'm going to refer to that as I ask my questions. It's on your presentation, Michael. It's, I think, page 1 or 2. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I do know a little bit about septic systems because I have one. So but probably know more than I want to know. But and I'm curious. You talked about this was upgraded and has no concerns about groundwater or being so close to Terry Lake. I'm curious. From older knowledge, I thought it had to be so far away. I don't know how far away it is from the Terry Lake. How close can a septic system of that type be close to a water source of that kind?
Sure. In this situation, this is a very small flow system. I should have mentioned that too. This is less than 300 gallons per day because it really is just office wastewater. So I want to be particular about that. We do add extra precautions for septic systems. When the septic is larger, there's bigger setbacks. So in this case, we are 100 feet required from the edge of a water body.
And you talked about a slow flow system, and that's for the, I think I read in the packet, for the restrooms and the break room. Is that correct? And that was an upgrade. I'm sure the 1972 system was not adequate and probably had a lot of challenges. So I'm curious, the current septic system that was probably designed to anticipate a little bit of growth or needed. How, so back to my question, is it beyond 100 feet or is it right 100 feet, or that's my first question. Where is it at? Do we know for exactly, or?
Right at 100. It has to meet at least a minimum of 100.
Okay.
And this system is specifically designed for the 18 employees potentially at a future proposed concrete facility. We have to do further evaluations for the site plan that's currently under review for the trucking business. That one has a lot more employees on site. So there might be a need for an expansion.
Reason for my line of questioning. So we're planning, this appeal is for the current site for current business, and it's only 100 feet from the water source, but it's designed for the current uses, but you're already stating that the trucking business would already, if it's, would need more of a system, it would have to be expanded. So if it's only 100 feet from the water source, my curiosity and I'm trying to understand this, because that would be another appeal or another, I mean, I'm curious because if it's already 100 feet, it'd have to be moved or be an appeal or an exception, and I'm trying to understand where it's at now. And if it's only able to serve 18, I don't know how many employees would be, and already even, not even talking about the batch plant, but just the current business, it's already not adequate. It sounds to me, what you just said, it's not adequate for what is already a business that's operating there. So I hope I'm making my line of questioning connected, but there's a lot of questions in my head. So I'm trying to pull this thread out for right now.
Okay. So in this situation, we would still have the 100 feet as the minimum setback, even if they had to go in and say enlarge the tank for a holding capacity for initial wastewater entering the system, or if they had to expand the septic field, we would have to go further south and not towards the lake. So they would have options. We may have to close down some road access and things like that. And this is only if they have to. We have an option in the septic regulations that's approved by the State Health Department as well. It's a process where you look at design flow or evaluate design flow based on water consumption rates. So this business has been existing, as we've heard. We would look at the average, or we would look at the daily water consumption rates through, I think that's West Fort Collins Water District. Yeah, okay. And we would look at daily water use, and we would evaluate that for maximum occupancies and the site, and then evaluate whether or not what is designed is adequate to treat that level or not. And if it's not, then yes, then they do have to go through an expansion process and add on to the field potentially and increase the tank size and the pressure doser.
Okay, that all makes sense to me. So back to another question, back circle. No, Leah, you're doing fine.
Okay.
I hope. You're doing fine. You're great. I'm just, go along with me here, because this is about a septic appeal, so I'm going there. What is approved right now is for 18 people and for the 100 feet setback, and would have to, but that, what I'm hearing, not you, but what I'm hearing from their presentation and staff, that currently the business that's there now that has been operating that for the last 3 years, that system was maybe not designed to meet what is currently happening. And you're mentioning flow rates and water usage, and I'm curious why that wasn't already used in designing the site, the septic site now, if that's already the use that's happening.
That's a fair question.
That's my question, because those dots don't connect for me right now.
That's fair. And I have to be honest, because I'm not sure. I'm not the water quality program coordinator for those applications that come in. But when we receive the engineer designs, because we do require an engineer to design the system, especially when we're hitting anything complicated like clay soils or bedrock or groundwater. And an engineer submitted a plan saying that we are proposing a future concrete batch plant at this site. They didn't explicitly go into detail about the current use remaining on site in the meantime. And so the water quality department based it on the 18-person concrete facility based on the engineer's proposal.
For the future, not for what's happening now.
Correct.
Okay. So the water usage was not calculated for what is happening.
No, it was not evaluated as part of this. It was part of the current septic that's in there, installed at this time.
Okay, so thank you. Let me ask this next question. So what I'm hearing is that the system that was designed that's currently there now was designed for an 18-person batch plant, not for what is the current use that's happening right now. Would that be a fair statement that I'm making?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I'll give you a break now. Thank you. But right now, what that 18 feet is for the 18 future batch plant, not for what's happening now. So that system is not really the size or design for what's happening right now on the property.
Potentially. We would have to do a water consumption evaluation or anything. And actually, those are part of comments under the TransPro site plan that's currently in. We require that they submit a change in use so that we can evaluate further as part of the process with planning.
Okay. Thank you. You've been very helpful. Okay. So my next question is, there was a lot of comments from a lot of folks about the IGA and the city not supporting this if it did not approval within the GMAs to match what was the future planning. I want to go back to that. I'm not sure this is a Frank question or a Mr. Whitley question. That's concerning for me, trying to understand what's happening now and what is in our IGAs and those agreements, and why, if this is already designed for something that's not approved yet or there, but not matching what's there, how is that not? I'm trying to understand how this is, why we don't need to, try to explain it, why do we not need to consider the IGA and the city's concerns and their resolutions? And I know I'm Frank, and I'm making you twitchy, I can see that, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to connect those dots right now.
Do you want to go first? So the IGA is always a consideration, and our working relationship is always a consideration. Again, kind of many of our standards are built into our land use code. This is a situation where the current zoning is not consistent with the future plans for the city of Fort Collins. So the structure plan is a kind of vision document for what the city of Fort Collins would like to ultimately happen within their city limits long-term once the properties are annexed into the city of Fort Collins. Again, this property is not immediately adjacent. It's not eligible for annexation. What we're having to do is work with the existing zoning, which does allow a variety of industrial and commercial uses subject to various review procedures. So there is a disconnect between what is allowed by the zoning and what is, kind of the future vision of the city of Fort Collins. Some of that is based on historic use. As I mentioned, this property was an auto salvage yard and a recycling facility, and the PD zoning was initially established to legalize one of those existing uses, but also it was based on what had historically happened on the property. So it's a balancing act. kind of respecting the existing zoning and respecting the vision of the city of Fort Collins. And so that's one of the reasons we have public hearings for these types of applications, is because it's not a black and white, cut and dry, yes or no, this is or is not, kind of what is good for this property at this time. It is a judgment call, and that is why we are before you now with regards to this septic appeal. Now, when we get to the special review, there'll be a whole different set of criteria with a whole different set of considerations. And so this is just one in many steps in this process. Does that answer your question?
Yep. I just needed to kind of, I've heard all the comments and questions in the public comment. I have tons of notes, but I'm asking right now in my brain processing these as I have my questions and going forward. And Ms. Snyder was very helpful with me connecting those dots. So I appreciate that. So Frank,
Just to add on to that, I mean, I think with the IGA, what the IGA says is that when we have certain kinds of development, we have to refer it to Fort Collins, and we have to proceed with pursuing an annexation petition for that. It still says in the IGA, ultimately it's up to the board. The decision with whether to approve something or not approve something rests with the Board of County Commissioners, whether it essentially says we're supposed to consider the wishes of Fort Collins and take it seriously and like Michael described, try to imagine what the long-term vision is going to be. The ultimate decision still rests with the Board of County Commissioners. In this particular case, I don't think this kind of development triggers that IGA for this appeal.
This appeal, as a separate entity, no, it does not trigger anything with regards to annexation or not. Again, the special review process is a trigger for annexation or consideration for annexation to the city of Fort Collins if the property were contiguous to the city of Fort Collins, meaning immediately adjacent. If it had any point of contiguity and the property owner applied for a special review, the city of Fort Collins could require that the property annexed to the city of Fort Collins get a zoning established that's consistent with the city of Fort Collins's, kind of master plan and long-term goals, and then go through their city of Fort Collins's land development process. Because this property is not immediately adjacent, annexation is not required. But it is certainly this is the type of application that would trigger annexation if it were adjacent.
that's helpful. Thank you. Frank, I want to, I'm assuming you might be the appropriate person to ask this next question, and if staff want to continue. And I'm sorry, colleagues, but I have some questions. So the letter we received from the Colorado Environmental Justice Ombudsman, which was dated on March 2nd of 2026, talks about the pros on site septic appeal, and it says it does not constitute a regulatory determination, although the land use authority rests with Larimer County, but it's charged with evaluating environmental justice considerations and promoting meaningful participation when communities exhibiting disproportionate environmental burdens may be affected. So they offered quite a few scores and documentation and testimony and data. And I'm wondering, we don't see some of these every day. I have testified on environmental justice things down at the legislature, but I'm curious, how does this fit? And I don't know, maybe staff want to comment on this too. How does this fit into something like this, into this kind of appeal for a septic system? Because this is a considerable letter from the state talking about environmental justice concerns. We had a community member come and testify who has lived there long term, and I do think that carries some weight. And there is a EnviroScreen Enviro report there, and there's some data that shows some pretty interesting numbers to consider. So I'm wondering, how do we consider this letter with reports to the review criteria. Sorry, I'm trying to give this thoughtful consideration, and so this is one that I wanted to save towards the end of my questions.
So, and I'm going to ask Michael to correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what happens is when they come in and they want to do this have a property with a septic inside the GMA, they have to appeal it. If they don't have one, they have to submit an appeal. They did submit an appeal. So now the criteria that the board is looking at is the criteria for an appeal. So you look at these criteria, the section 4.3.5.A.4 says you will submit an appeal and the appeal shall include the following items. So the criteria there in 4.3.5.A.4 is just the application requirements. The criteria for the appeal are the appeal criteria. So the answer to your question is they raise a number of issues in that letter about sort of quality or whatever other things. Those need to be fit into it. To the extent you want to consider it, you would need to consider it in light of those appeal criteria.
And I can add on to that. So I have that letter right in front of me, and it does talk about existing conditions with regards to regional ozone non-attainment status. And then it talks about anticipated diesel truck traffic, potential particulate matter and fugitive dust, and a reported incident of kind of dust, dispersion. So there's an existing non-attainment, kind of status that is not, directly tied to this particular property. And then the other concerns are about potential impacts of actual land uses. And so again, this septic appeal is separating out the septic question from the land use question with regards to impacts. So yes, there will be a much, kind of greater consideration of environmental impacts with particularly a future concrete batch plant, because that has actual impacts in terms of traffic, particulate emissions, runoff, etc. The septic appeal is what we're considering tonight. And so the question, and I did call Mr. Howell, who wrote this letter last week and left a voicemail, and I have not received a return call. I specifically asked, this letter references the appeal and it references the special review. Are there specific concerns with the appeal that need to be paid attention to with regards to your concerns? I haven't received that, kind of return call. My reading of the letter is that the concerns are with existing conditions with non-attainment with regards to air quality, and then potential future impacts of other land uses. So if you separate out the impacts of the on-lot septic from the impacts of other potential impacts from other uses, those are completely different impacts. I do not read into this letter a specific concern with the on-lot septic system, but with future other land uses that could be facilitated by the approval of this appeal.
Thank you. I'm going to ask this question after your last statement. And I appreciate you reading the letter and trying to make contact. I have read the letter, of course, and we heard the testimony. So I'll go back to the septic system was designed for future use, not for what's currently happening on the site. So it's not really potential. There is already impacts from the potential uses that are happening now. But that septic system wasn't even designed for those current uses, potential uses that are happening right now. So this letter could apply to the uses that are happening now or have been the last 3 years that have maybe a disproportionately impacted environmental justice impact on those communities. Yeah. There's something happening in there now in the last 3 years. It's not like nothing has been happening. Something has been impacting those communities, but the septic system appeal isn't even is addressing a future use. Really, it sounds like was designed for a future use with 18 people and not currently what's happening now. So that's my disconnect.
Yeah, and I understand that, and it is very hard to separate out the two, but the way the land use code is structured and the way our processes work, the question before the board tonight is, should this property be allowed to continue to use an existing septic system and or be able to expand that septic system should an expanded septic system need to be, if the septic system would need to be expanded for any current or future use. So that is at the discretion of the board. The other actual land uses are being considered through other processes. And I would note that, of course, you are aware, but just kind of make it explicit for the audience, the Board of County Commissioners has the ability to attach conditions to this appeal. Staff is not proposing any conditions, but one of the speakers mentioned a potential condition that the board can consider. I'm not suggesting that. We're not making a recommendation with regards to conditions, but if you have specific concerns, you can memorialize those concerns in conditions of approval.
Thank you for that. I did think about that with some of those comments from the public comments. So I think that's all the questions I have for right now. I see that maybe Leah and Frank had been talking. Would you like to further answer one of my questions?
I would like to provide some context with CDPHE's environmental justice group. We have been talking. They've been working with me about air quality. So I would support the idea that the EJ group is very concerned about the proposed future uses and whether this will compound burdens in an existing environmentally burdened area already. We have an 81% on our EnviroScreen score on the census block to the south that contains several of our mobile home communities. And this is all mentioned in our special review comments as well, because it is a concern. And I will say, I think CDPHE, EJ, they had received an opportunity to submit comments for the special review, a site plan, an appeal, and they weren't sure where to go with all of it. But when we met in January and when we've been continuing to interact, it has been focused on air quality and the impacts of the future uses, both TransPro, Fleet, and the concrete batch plans proposal. But they never mentioned septic system design when we've discussed, because of the concerns they've received from community members relate specifically to air pollution.
But as you mentioned, the uses of the trucking, the fleet, that's happening now, and so those impacts are happening now.
Yes,
but the septic system that was put in doesn't match the uses that are there now.
Right. But it might. We don't know. They have to actually submit true water use data. It might be okay. What they had provided initially, it's averages, and we're not going to accept averages. So
okay, that's you're answering my question.
Okay,
thank you. Any staff, Frank? Anybody else want to add that to that? Okay, all right. I think that's all I had, colleagues. Any other further questions? Okay, are we ready for deliberations? All right, we'll start with Commissioner Stevens.
All right. Well, thank you for everyone who came out and stuck with us till almost 9 o'clock. Appreciate you coming and, and your comments. Want to make sure that people understand that this is about the septic system and not about the special review. So, we can't, while I think there were a lot of good points brought up around air quality and noises and other kinds of things, those are things that we can't consider in this particular hearing. What we can consider is the criteria that has been given to us. And I will not be supporting this appeal, and I will tell you why. First of all, I don't believe the appeal meets the criteria A under 6.7.2B5. Approval of the appeal will not subvert the purpose of the standard or requirement. The standard is that there's requires public sewer in the GMA to ensure development occurs at urban level densities consistent with the municipality's comprehensive plan. To me, it doesn't meet that. While I understand the difficulties of sewer, it doesn't meet that standard, in my opinion. Sewer is expensive, certainly, to connect, but it is possible to connect. The other review criteria that I don't believe was met was E, and that's falls under section 4.3.5.A.4. That says that when connection to a public system is not technically or economically feasible, provided specific documentation is submitted. They did not get the letter from the municipality that indicates a willingness to annex this property when it becomes eligible for annexation, so that was not met either. Furthermore, in section 4.3.5.A.4, a letter from the applicable municipality indicating their concurrence that the development as proposed will achieve the land use pattern envisioned for this part of the growth management area, that was not included. It clearly to me does not achieve the land use pattern that's envisioned for this part of the growth management area. Because of those reasons, I will not approve this appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Commissioner Kafalis.
Thank you, colleagues. First of all, I certainly want to express genuine appreciation for all the folks that are assembled here. I think there were perhaps 15 people that offered public testimony. Thank you for that. It's very helpful. I also want to express appreciation, certainly to the applicant. This is what they do, and certainly staff and the various attorneys and consultants and who are participating in this public process. I'm also not able to support this appeal, and I will focus on, well, there were a couple of, I'll focus on one of the review criteria that was referenced by Commissioner Stevens, and that is under, the general review criteria 6.7.2, 6.7.2.B.5 E, approval of the appeal is consistent with the intent and the purpose of the code. As I understand things, if you want to do a septic system in an urban area or in a growth management area, you have to have an appeal approved. And there is a letter. There are 5 items that need to be included, and I don't believe that all 5 items have been achieved. In particular, B, C, and D. A letter from the applicable city utility or sanitation, domestic wastewater treatment works provider indicating concurrence that it is not feasible to connect to public wastewater treatment. I think, as my colleague indicated, as a couple of folks stated, at this time it's not feasible, but it doesn't mean that a couple of years down the road the infrastructure would not be more available to provide public sewer. On C, a letter from the applicable municipality indicating their concurrence that the development as proposed will achieve the land use pattern envisioned for this part of the growth management area. The way it is currently being used based on the planned development, heavy industrial, is not compatible with the envisioned structure plan of the city of Fort Collins. And therefore, I don't think that's been adequately addressed. And then finally, D, on the matter of annexation, I think that the city has indicated through the letters that when the infrastructure in place, that is an option, but that won't be right away. And as an industrial use, it is not compatible with annexing that area and running public sewer out there. Therefore, based on just that particular review criteria that relates to the 4.3.5A4 regarding on-site wastewater treatment systems in a GMA, I don't think we've met that, all of it. I mean, there were two references in the development services report that said, I circled these. One was that the applicant now, and this is under E, the applicant has now submitted most of the required documentation to satisfy the code provision, and elsewhere it indicates the applicant has largely satisfied the requirements of section 4.3.5, etc. And it might read on the way we're to do this that everything has to be met. Therefore, I too will not be supporting this appeal.
Thank you, colleagues. I too cannot support this application as presented. My reasonings are very similar to my colleagues. When you talked about the mostly and largely, that did catch my attention. And so I understand that it had to be, to meet that, the approval of the appeal consistent with the intent and purpose of the code. And so they don't have the letters, and I agree with what Commissioner Kafalis had said. And I do think that we do have to consider the IGA, and the city has been very clear this does not match the long-term vision of the city of Fort Collins. Also, I do think because of the current use and what's happening now, I do think item B, approval of the appeal will not be detrimental to public health, safety, or property values in the area. I still think what's happening now and the approval of the septic is that's not really designed for what's happening now, as noted that this is maybe anticipated generalized water flow, but that's not what's happening right now. And so I feel like what's happening now and approval of the appeal would still be detrimental to public health and safety. And so, I'm still very concerned that what was designed is for something in the future and not what is actually currently happening on site. And so I'm just, confused why the septic wasn't designed for the current usage. It's happening now. The last 3 years. So that is also a concern for me. And I agree along with my colleagues about section 4.3.5. Point A4 of the code, talking about the development in the urban districts in JMA, really includes proposal that shall submit an appeal as part of this application, and all the items shall include the following items: A, B, C, D, and E. And I don't feel those have all been fully met. And so that also, I think the approval of the appeal is minimum action necessary because the site, the septic system and the appeal for there now, but the expansion, I still, they don't have all the data in to know what exactly is all needed for the expansion, and it's not really designed for what's currently happening. So I really have a concern and a question still about the approval of the appeal as the minimum action necessary. So with all of that and echoing a lot of my colleagues' comments, I cannot support this. So I'll ask, I believe it's Commissioner Kafalis' turn to make a motion. Commissioner Kafalis, would you please make that motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. I move that the Larimer County Board of Commissioners deny approval of the Aragon Holdings on lot septic appeal file number 25-GNRL 0577.
Thank you for that motion. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
And that's not what's on the screen. What, can we clarify that?
Yeah, yes, actually, can you repeat your motion? Because I thought I heard that the motion was for approval.
No, deny.
Okay, all right. I thought that's what I heard.
Welcome to borrow my hearing aids, Michael, if you'd like.
One more time? No, so the motion is for denial of the Aragon Holdings septic appeal, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay.
Good, sir.
Okay, Commissioner Kafalis, just for the record, Frank. I'm just going to, you want to say something? I was just going to have Commissioner Gonzalez to alleviate any confusion for what's on the screen, have him repeat his motion.
You want me to repeat it?
Yeah, just be clear. Is that, Frank, did you want to add something to that?
I just was going to note that you hadn't voted yet, but if you,
No, I know we haven't voted, but just since there's a little confusion, I'm going to ask Commissioner Gonzalez just to read his motion that says, just so we are very clear.
Okay. I move that the Board of County Commissioners deny the Aragon Holdings on lot septic appeal file number 25-GNRL 0577.
Thank you. There is no further discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. As that motion passes 3-0. At 8:59, there is no further business. We are adjourned as a Board of County Commissioners for this land use hearing. Thank you.
I really did.